Thank you for joining us for our online coverage of the Atlanta race for mayor, the runoff election between Mary Norwood and Keisha Lance Bottoms. I'm Fox 5 News anchor Tom Haines with the Georgia Gang's Jeff Dickerson and Phil Kent. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Let's take a look at some early numbers that we're getting. I say early, it's 20 after 9, and put them up here. Mary Norwood in the early going here has a sizable lead over Keisha Lance Bottoms, 61% to 39%, with not many precincts reporting here, just over 1,000 votes. Do these early numbers, guys, tell us anything about the direction that this race is going to go, Jeff?
No. I think that these numbers are probably from DeKalb County, which means that Fulton hasn't done anything at all as we expected. You know, counting their votes is going to be like watching paint dry. And we're going to be here a while. So, I mean, you know, tens of thousands of votes hopefully are going to be counted in this election, and we're looking at 1,200 votes. They don't tell us anything at all.
Phil, what do you see so far from what we're hearing?
Jeff's right. They don't tell us much. He is right, too, that these are from DeKalb County, which is a Democratic bastion. And, of course, as we know, it's supposedly a nonpartisan mayoral race, but that's just a facade. The state Democratic Party has gotten into the race, and you would assume that these would be Democratic voters. So with Mary Norwood leading, that's an interesting small indicator.
Guys, what do these two candidates know? They do spend a lot of money on research. What do they know from the time the general election is held to the time this runoff race is held? In other words, in that month, do they do polling? Do they do opposition research? Do they know sort of which way things are going to go before election night? Do they have a pretty good idea, or is everything up in the air, Jeff?
I don't think that anything is up in the air. I think that they try to gather as much information as they can, as much opposition research. We've seen the products of some of that research, and they try to pigeonhole those voters. They try to narrow down who those voters are who are likely to go back to the polls. They know who they are. They know that these people are consistent, loyal voters, and they'll go back. And they target those voters, and they go out and they say, we want your vote.
Phil, national politics and politicking is a pretty complex machine. On a local level here for, say, Atlanta mayor, how does a Mary Norwood or a Keisha Lance Bottoms drill down on those? And I think it was, what, up to 20% of people who are undecided.
That's right.
Find those voters and reach them in one way or another.
It's amazing what the political consultants will tell you and what they do these days. Yes, it goes to targeting, and it goes to various groups. You had mentioned earlier, Tom, the Kathy Woolard bastion in Midtown and in East Atlanta, a battleground. You're targeting voters in Buckhead, which, as we have pointed out earlier, is voting heavy, especially in early voting, because there's also a Fulton County Commission chairman race. So it's targeting, and to Jeff's point, your advertising is getting especially effective with messaging. The last-minute shots that both sides have been taken, whether it's the issue is corruption or the issue is Trump or whatever.
Television advertising? Is it in the newspaper? Is it targeting people via social media?
Well, you know,
on so many platforms, right?
I have friends that got out their iPhones this afternoon, and the Norwood campaign and the Bottoms campaign are texting saying, you have until 8 o'clock tonight to go to 2850 Smith Street, where your polling place is, to vote. That is how targeted they know voters are.
So Keisha Lance Bottoms, Jeff, should have had an advantage coming off the Kasim Reed administration. I mean, he must be in possession of a lot of voter information data, and she could have used that. He endorsed her, after all.
Well, the data is public and available to all candidates. I mean, you can look back last cycle before last, cycle before that, and say, here are our core voters, and we can identify these core voters, and we know which ones voted Democratic and which ones voted Republican. It is really almost down to a science. You know how many votes that you need to win this runoff. You know that you'll need 50,000 votes or 60,000 votes to prevail in this runoff. So it's a matter of going out there, finding those folks, getting them to the polls, making sure they vote for your candidate.
Phil, what about experience in running for Atlanta mayor? Obviously, Mary Norwood has been around this block before. She was in a close and contentious race with Mayor Kasim Reed 8 years ago. Does that give her a leg up in terms of running for a second time? You could have said the same thing about Hillary Clinton, although it didn't work out for her. But this is a different race. Does her experience in running for mayor give her an advantage over Keisha Lance Bottoms?
Well, the answer is yes. If you go into her headquarters, there's a giant map, and she knows all of the neighborhoods. She's been there, as we've talked about, and she shows up at all of these meetings. So, again, like Jeff says, she knows the various precincts that she has to pull out. She's had the volunteers there. They're targeting that with social media. Again, it's amazing what the strategists have to do and to get out there door to door. There's still retail politics that goes on here in Atlanta.
There's an awful lot of retail politics, and not only has she experienced that and she's gone through this process before, this runoff, but Keisha Lance Bottoms has never been in a runoff. This is her first runoff for any race.
Jeff, to characterize these two candidates, I've been watching Keisha Lance Bottoms. Our Morris Diggs has done exhaustive coverage of the race on both sides. I watched an interview with her that he did yesterday, and I don't know if you guys saw it, where he was doing sort of a last interview with the two of them to answer some of the attack ads that the other were waging against them, and said, well, we'll answer the question about your water bills and answer the question about some of the corruption charges and the fact that you had two state jobs or something.
City jobs.
I wasn't sure as a viewer and as a voter watching her how strongly she came off. Was she a strong mayoral candidate in your judgment?
I think that a lot, particularly African American voters and women voters, who are the largest block of voters out there in the city of Atlanta, comprise about 12% of the voting age of the voting population, are looking for a couple of things: passion and compassion. And I'm not so sure that they saw a lot of emotion with Keisha Lance Bottoms. She's just not that kind of person. She's not going to get out there and bare her soul. And
she tried to put her family out there.
She
did
has
all those ads with the kids.
She has. I think in a very a strategic kind of way. She's done that. There's some things about her family that we don't know. She hasn't really talked so much about the fact, here's a person who's adopted 4 kids, right? I mean, that should qualify you for sainthood, if not the mayor's office. And not a lot of people go out and do that. And she, she hadn't worn that on her sleeve. And probably to her credit and to her family's credit. But I do think that voters...
Wouldn't that have been advantageous for her?
I think that it would have, but she just, she didn't want to...
Roll up
obviously,
the sleeve
she didn't want to use her family in that way, and she didn't.
Okay.
But yeah, I think that certain voters are looking for some passion, and I don't know that they all saw the kind of passion that they'd like to see in Keisha.
Phil, did Mary Norwood exemplify that kind of passion?
I think
she connect with voters in a different way than Keisha Lance Bottoms?
I think so. We saw the debates, for example, and I think Mary Norwood generally is as cool as a cucumber. You don't see her hurling insults or getting flustered. I think that Keisha Lance Bottoms could have addressed the issues far more specifically. If you look at the candidates' 2 websites, for example, Mary Norwood has very detailed solutions to a lot of the city problems, and that's what people worry about. Their wallet, they want their potholes fixed, they're worried about zoning and this and that, city issues. Keisha Lance Bottoms, if you look at her website, yes, there's some meat, but not all that much. It's an interesting contrast on how Mary has very detailed solutions.
Jeff, we just got through one of the most expensive congressional races. No, excuse me, the most expensive congressional race in the history of this country, Congressional District 6. What kind of money did it take for these 2 candidates, Mary Norwood and Keisha Lance Bottoms, to spend to become mayor of Atlanta? What kind of money did they spend? Millions of dollars?
Well, we can't just limit it to them because we had so many candidates in the race, right? And so if you look at
all of them, do you have to have?
You look at all of them combined, you're talking about $10 million running for a local municipal office. It's a lot of money. $10 million, right? And between these 2 who have finished, you're probably looking at somewhere in the area of $4 million, including the runoff. My understanding is that they're both in the red at this point. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money in politics, and it's only going to grow, I think, and get, I hate to say the word, but worse over time, both locally, regionally, and nationally.
Well, the fact of the matter is, Phil, that Atlanta's a big city. It's a top 10 market here, as we call it in television, one of the 10 largest cities in the country. And what happens in Atlanta not only has a ripple effect, we were talking about on some of the suburban areas that surround 285, but the entire state.
Exactly. We are the capital city. We are the economic engine of the state. So much of the state's growth is focused in this, 18, 19 county metro Atlanta. And it's big money now. I think we've seen this coming. With the bottoms race, you saw the state Democratic Party, in my opinion, wasting hundreds of thousands of dollars on these ads at the last minute that are just attacking Mary Norwood as some sort of Trump puppet, which is really foolish. Anyone who knows Mary, and a lot of people do, knows that she's an independent. And what's wrong with working with Democrats and Republicans? What's wrong with being photographed?
No, nothing's wrong.
With,
I think that there's
Republican
something
leaders. It's
about
silly.
being.
They show photographs of Mary Norwood with some Republican leaders, and they think that's horrible.
When you go into a Republican organization, you say the only reason I'm running as an independent is because I know I can't win as a Republican. You're telling the whole world what you really are.
Well, actually, you've distorted what she just said. She said, I go to Republican meetings, I voted Republican, sometimes I voted for Hillary Clinton. No Republican votes for Hillary Clinton.
No,
Come
she
on.
said to them, the only reason I'm running as an independent is because you can't win as a
H.W. Bush, I believe, said that he did.
There you go. You got found one exception. Thank you.
Maybe Mitt Romney did, too. We don't know. Jeff, the race at the end of the day will come down to which of these two women made the most significant impression on voters, because as we were talking about earlier, it's one thing to get voters to come out the first time around, but boy, to get them to the polls the second time, that's even tougher.
Yeah, and sometimes it's
tough road to hoe.
It's your campaign and the kind of organization that you have and the kind of energy that you have behind that campaign and getting folks out to the polls on that voting day, and that's what folks have been doing all day long. Lots of volunteers, lots of campaign workers getting out there, making sure folks get to the polls, and so I think that that's played a large part of it as well.
Phil, are big city mayoral races reflective at all with the national mood and what's going on in national politics, whether it's Atlanta or Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York, Miami? I mean, does what happens in a city this size reflect what's going on around the country?
The answer can be yes, and I think in Atlanta it partially is. We talked earlier about the Norwood theme of having a clean break and the fact that other leaders in this city like Shirley Franklin and Kathy Woolard endorsed the clean break. So while Mary Norwood has been around a long time, you can't really qualify her as an outsider, but she's framing this like nationally, we don't want a third term of Kasim Reed. And in the very end of this campaign, Keisha Lance Bottoms got on the defense. She had to try to distance herself from Kasim Reed, and I think it's too late.
Phil, excuse me, Jeff, one more thing before we sign off here and we gather some more information about what's happening. Is Atlanta a changing city and a changing demographic? And in your experience here and the many years that you've lived and worked here, have you seen it evolve, and how so? In other words, we're talking about the race element and the fact that Mary Norwood would be the first white mayor in many decades, but how is Atlanta changing, and how is the mood of the city changing and the voting demographic?
I think it's changing generationally. I think that you have a generation of people who are raised in the suburbs who want to live in the city. You have
it's a good thing,
you have a generation. It can be a good thing and a bad thing. It's a good thing that it brings vibrancy and small businesses back to the city. It's a bad thing in that it displaces tens of thousands of people who've been living there.
Yeah,
and
because
so
affordability was a big issue.
Affordability is a big issue. Affordability is a big issue going forward, and so you have a lot of millennials who are moving into traditionally African American communities, the old Fourth Ward, the home of Martin Luther King Jr.
Right.
And Inman Park and other areas close in town. They're attracted by the Beltline. They're attracted by Ponce City Market and all of these new kinds of developments. In the meantime, prices are going through the roof. They're pushing people out, and we could have a very different looking city in 10 years and 8 years. The next time that we face this kind of electoral cycle, we could have a very different demographic in the city of Atlanta than we're facing.
So you're
right
saying
now.
It's different from even the last 8 years?
It's much different than it was 8 years ago, and that's why when you look at that vote in East Atlanta and you look at that vote in these in-town communities, that can be the deciding factor this evening.
All right, gentlemen, thanks so much. I want to throw the graphic up again, and show you where things stand right now as we've come up on about 25 minutes to 10, and here's where we shake out. These numbers don't say much, if anything, about where the race stands right now. These are just some of the preliminary numbers that we're getting in, with 61 to 39. That is sure to change as the evening goes on, and we'll continue to watch it here in the Fox 5 newsroom. We'll have an update for you tonight on the news, on air at 10, and of course on News Edge at 11. Thanks so much for joining us.